And now I'm going to slow down. Hello, everybody. This is Dr. Brigid Burke, and I'm here with Dr. Joanna Madloch. We are both here from the New Institute for the Study of Feminine Myth. We see 3 people are joining already. Yeah, we are, as we know, we had Wednesday night, we had a session with Dr. Max Orsini. So we would talk a little bit about his classes and what we're doing. Kate was going to try to join us today, Dr. Kingsbury, but she wasn't able to. So at the last minute, so it'll just be Joanna and I, which is great. I haven't seen Joanna forever, and you know, I'm happy to you know, happy to see you and happy to be able to talk to you. Yeah, so as I was mentioning, for people who maybe didn't catch up with the last live stream, and oh, hi Pat, I see you're on. It's we were talking last time about just the school itself, just kind of answering questions about it, about what we're doing here, and also just wanted, so I don't want to repeat myself for people who have been here before, but we do have things. I do have links in the description for this video for people who want to register. There's registration links down there. And people can register for the full term, or if people want to audit individual classes, usually it's 2-week blocks because we're going to do the lecture, and then the next week there'll be a conversation about it for each of the classes. That you know, people can register for individual auditing as well. And also people who just say, yeah, I don't want to do this right now, but it's cool and I want to donate. There's also a GoFundMe link. So people can, so whatever people want to do, or if people just want to check it out, the website link is also in the description box below. So yeah, so it's, so yeah, so how have you been, Joanna? Everything good?
Yes, thank you for having me, Brigid. Hello to everyone who's there. I cannot see.
Yeah, we've got people tended to trickle in as the live stream goes on. I forget how many we had last time. I think we ended up with 10 people, and then and then I don't know, later on there was a whole bunch of others. I think I saw there was 40 or 50 views last time I looked at it. So yeah, and yeah, we haven't really gotten a chance to catch up lately. And I know Joanna and I had both done, people who follow Cattonia, because a lot of people who follow Cattonia are also interested in this school and what we're doing. Joanna and I had, you know, we've talked about, I think Baba Yaga was the first one, and that's going to be the subject of your lecture next week, actually. It's already Wednesday of next week, if you can believe it. It's like, how do we get to October? I just, like, it's crazy. I don't know how this happened, but in any case, we are, yeah, so we're gonna be starting next week. People who have actually already enrolled will get the links for the class in advance, so that we can all do that. And then I know there's some people in other time zones mainly have had a lot of questions about, you know, well, you know, is there any way that they can join if they're from the UK or from Australia or from different places where they're not on the, obviously on the Eastern time zone, but we're kind of having to do it when people are available. Maybe next semester we might be a little more flexible with time. Right now I teach Saturday and Sunday in person in certain places. So and online too. So I don't have, that wasn't an option for me. And I'm going to be tech supporting every single episode. So so I will be the one doing the Zoom, moderating, introducing everybody when we do the lectures, and then, you know, just being there in case there's any technical problems, in addition to doing a lecture myself. So I've introduced myself. So Joanna, actually, if you could just introduce yourself, just tell people like a little bit about your background, because I know you're certainly your academic background, but also I know you're interested in some other things like photography and so forth as well. So if you could, yeah, just tell people about yourself a little bit.
Okay, so my background, my education is really in literature, and I have a PhD in literature from a university in Poland, which you could have figured out from these 2 sentences I already said, that I have a foreign accent. But the fact that I have the Polish accent gives you kind of guarantee that I know what I'm talking about firsthand, because I'm really interested in the stories associated with Baba Yaga and the general idea of a witch in Eastern myth, in Eastern European myth, because if you join the lecture, you are going to find out how different it is from the Western one. And it interests me not for the sake of these differences, but how they formed, how different kind of lifestyle and the stories we say form our ideas about the world differently, and how they work out today. So I'm interested in Baba Yaga. I've been always interested in Baba Yaga because, after all, I heard these stories through my childhood. I was regularly scared with these stories. When I was a child, one of the ways of upbringing children was to scare them to death. And you can scare them with Baba Yaga easily. But what really interested me is why, when this character is scary, it's also incredibly attractive and one of the most complex, and the one that does not fit perfectly in the binary world of the somehow monolithic patriarchal religious culture. So Baba Yaga, this is one of my interests. I'm really thinking seriously about paying more attention in my academic work, and also trying to write something about Baba Yaga, especially when you go around to bookstores, you're going to find more and more. Actually, I can see how the world is involved, because this is what I found recently. A great prize in, I think this is the Japanese author.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yes. And also, like this link, like being linked to completely different culture. And
seriously, yeah.
And I applied this study to what I'm teaching now in my real life. I teach great books and ideas in honors program at Montclair State University. And I talk a lot about this feminine story and how, witches in general are portrayed in our stories. So I teach, I write a lot, and recently I write about photography. I'm a photographer too, and I'm very interested in, when I talk about photography, I'm most interested in the idea of the photographer, who the photographer is, not the images, but the photographer. And also in female photographers, which is sort of rarity still in professional world. Mm-hmm. And also I write a book about how the photographer is portrayed in fiction as the incarnation of the myth of the trickster, the idea of the trickster. And interestingly, when a woman photographer appears in fiction, how she is a witch or a Baba Yaga. So, somehow all these links.
Yeah, that's interesting, because I know I've seen part of, well, at least the beginning chapters of that book, and that book so far looks like it's going to be really fascinating.
Yes, I'm going to Cyprus in November at a big photography conference to talk about.
Nice. Oh, that's right. Yeah, the traveling for all these conferences, it's such a nice thing. I haven't. This hasn't been a year of travel for me, but I remember I used to do quite a bit of them, and I know you've traveled quite extensively too. Like, it seems like you've been, you've been a few places recently, I think. So yeah.
Yes.
So so interesting, and it's interesting. That was interesting. I had with regard to Baba Yaga, you were talking about as you were a child, that you were raised with these stories. And it was funny because downstairs I was going through, I have a whole series of like Halloween books from when I was a child, including, some of the favorite ones I read like in first grade, which was like, well, a long time ago. And I found this book of fairy tales. And that's the first place that I found the Baba Yaga story, actually. That's the first story in this book. There's a story about Baba Yaga. There's a story about like a Scottish tailor and like a goblin. And I think this Legend of Sleepy Hollow's in there too. So it's kind of a weird mix of like stories. Like I was like, the three of these go together, like, or do they, But yeah, that was the first time I had seen Baba Yaga. But of course, since then, there's a lot of different, I've seen a lot of different permutations of that story, because it's not like there's just one, there's the one story of the girl, the stepmother sends her into the forest, and, but there's different permutations of that. It's not all just, there's not just one variation of that story, No,
and I completely agree. And I can even say why this happens, because this character is so complex and so multi-leveled that you can literally take something from Baba Yaga and kind of play with it, right? Because when you think about witches of the West, there are usually very negative characters, and Baba Yaga is in a way a negative character. But it's also, when you think about different like fairy tale mythological characters, and you think about like what would they do if they live now? Would they adopt? Oh, Baba Yaga would adopt beautifully. You know, it's like you can literally see Baba Yaga changing for the modern world. So I can see why she travels through stories and through different cultures and how it can be adapted. And there's a great interest in Baba Yaga. The book I showed you is like one of many. And in a way, there's like the revival of thinking about Baba Yaga, because obviously of the feminist reading of these stories, but also the great interest in nature. And Baba Yaga is deeply associated with nature. Obviously, she represents the powers of nature, especially the powers of the forest, and the healing powers of nature, and also like ecological kind of attitude here is definitely visible.
Yeah, and now it's interesting because when I mentioned it, because I've been posting the different classes that we're teaching on Instagram, I've been trying to just kind of give people a flavor for what people are going to be talking about and what they can register for. And somebody did comment to me at one point there, like that they listened to the podcast that you and I did more than once, and but they'd also said, they said, well, you know, if you're involved in practice, like pagan practice, they said, you know, there's another level or another layer to Baba Yaga that's beyond the academic. So I'm just wondering, is that anything? I mean, I know that's not necessarily like what, like I know you're not a pagan practitioner doing that kind of a thing, right? But I'm just wondering what kind of, if you know of or have any awareness of people who actually kind of honor Baba Yaga in that way, like now. In the modern world.
Absolutely. There's a great revival, I think, everywhere in Europe of pagan practices of various kinds. And even in countries like so Catholic like Poland, there is a revival of pagan understanding. And this is very deeply linked to the thinking about nature and what is left and what we can save. But also I ask exactly this like very similar question regarding to Russian Far East, mostly like Siberia, where Christianity was almost completely eradicated by the communist rule. And I asked this question a person who is researching these regions, and when I asked about religion, she said, you know, it's mostly pagan. It's pagan, and it's very often matriarchal. So this is like searching for the protection of Baba Yaga, and this is like renewal of our connection to nature.
That's a really good point, actually, because I think that's certainly one very strong aspect of her, and the stories of her. It's interesting because I see that kind of as a motif in a lot of the feminine stories, where it becomes you have this woman who has this witchy figure who, again, if you try to look at it from an ethical standpoint, you know, the idea of the witch in the forest who might eat people and stuff like that, like, you know, there's or who is very dangerous in that way. And the first version of Baba Yaga I met was like almost, she was almost like the Hansel and Gretel witch, in the sense of like, you know, I want to, you know, I'm luring children there so I can cook them for dinner, kind of thing. Which is another dark feminine motif, which is well, I don't want to derail into that, but it's interesting because because this idea of nature as something like, if you treat nature with respect, the yields that you get back from it, whereas if you are careless and take advantage and you know, then the consequences are going to be in accordance with that. And I think that's something that's really prevalent in the Baba Yaga story in particular.
Yes, and especially, you know, like many people are introduced to Baba Yaga through the Russian fairy tale Vasilisa the Beautiful. And this is exactly the story, that the girl comes to her and she's good and kind and hardworking and willing to cooperate, and she's rewarded. And then bad girl comes and she's greedy and lazy and all these things, and she's punished by this, right? And she's disrespectful, yes. But also, I think another element of Baba Yaga here is like, you can do everything right and still it's not going to work. This is like with nature, right? It's like, you think you control it? No, you don't, right?
Yeah,
like,
that's a really good point. Yeah, the fact that nature is not something that's in our control. And yeah, we kind of live, kind of talking about how we're reworking stories. We tend to have this mindset because the kind of Western mindset, and whenever I say this to people sometimes get defensive about it, I guess, because if I try to say to them, look, looking at things from your rational, scientific, that's not the only way to look at things. And then people say, oh, you're irrational and you're anti-science. I'm like, no, I'm not irrational and I'm not anti-science. I mean, science has its place and so does this kind of work. But when it comes to nature, there's always this attitude, that we can, if we screw nature up, we can just come up with something to fix it because we know how to. There was a lecture I listened to. It was Alan Watts. He has a lecture called "You Cannot Improve Yourself." It's the best lecture ever, and he talks about this exact thing, the way in which people do things, because whether it has to do with nature, whether it has to do with political systems, and the way that we do things, it's like, oh, we're going to make this better, and and it's just like, he's like, but you don't even know how to make it better. You don't know how to make yourself better. How are you going to make it better? Yeah, the idea of control. Pat has a question here. Is Baba Yaga related to sovereignty? I love how it's related to nature. Okay, so yeah, there's a question. Is Baba Yaga related to sovereignty? Because sovereignty goddesses sometimes have to do with the land and so forth.
It's like she's like associated with land, like directly with land. The thing I like about her the best is that she's on the move.
Okay.
So in a way, she, like tricksters in generally, she doesn't possess. She doesn't own the place. She does not reside. If you know her, like how she's imagined in stories, like one of her most important aspects is that she's very hard to find. So she's on the move, and she's on the move thanks to her attributes, like she has the house on a chicken leg.
On chicken legs, yes. Mm-hmm.
It can walk away.
Right, yeah.
So not only it can walk away, it spins. And she also travels. She flies the mortar.
Mortar and pestle, yeah.
Yes, she flies the mortar and pestle. So this is like, she is the woods. She is in the woods, but she can be anywhere, right? And she's not.
Right, and she's not somebody, I guess, okay, to strictly speaking, not somebody who grants sovereignty, like that's not part of her role, like say in the way the Morrigan might be a goddess like that, who is connected to the sovereignty of, say, parts of Ireland and so forth.
Yes.
So what she is more is she's more of about that force of nature that you have to negotiate.
You negotiate it all the time, and as we said before,
you can't always find it, yeah.
Yeah, you cannot bind it. You can negotiate it. You can do everything right, and still the nature is not going to care. It's a lot. It's capricious too.
Mm-hmm.
It's capricious. It's unpredictable. So like for me, it has this very important trickster characteristics. It's wild.
Yes.
This is the best word for it. It's wild. It's wild. It doesn't care.
And that's a good point, actually, because people who are interested in the pagan practice aspect, I was having a conversation with somebody earlier today. Oh, you're welcome, Pat. The other thing, we were having a conversation earlier about the way in which modern paganism, at least in the USA, that isn't necessarily true in other places, but the way that it tends to template like Judeo-Christian kind of thinking. It tends to be like, oh, okay, I'm going to worship, and you were talking about like, I don't know, Hecate or Persephone or whoever, in the same way that I might approach the Christian God. And it's like, yeah, but it's not the same thing. And I think what you've just said about Baba Yaga, I think that wildness to it. And that's the thing. Like when people read Greek mythology, because you and I both have taught Greek and Roman mythology as well. And, that's what people will say. They're like, well, they don't act like gods. And it's like, well, they do, but they act like the ancient gods are different. They're forces. And yeah, it's like if you offer them something and then they still do what they're going to do anyway, that's just how they are. I had read a book, I think Jerry, she had recommended it to me, Achilles in Vietnam. Now, I know we're kind of moving into Greek, but just by comparison here. And she was talking about, one of the things I remember when I read that book was, it was basically a therapist who was working with PTSD victims from Vietnam and using the Iliad and the Odyssey as a tool to help them, because he was saying there's a lot of the things that the military people could relate to in these stories. And one of the things he pointed out was that a lot of people went who were Catholic, and the Catholic Church told them, well, you should enlist because communism is evil and you need to, God wants you to fight because, you're on God's side and all this kind of stuff. And then when things didn't quite work out as expected, then they started to feel like, well, did God abandon me? Does God hate me? Maybe there is no God. Like there was all of this stuff. And one of the things that the author, I think his name is Jonathan Shea, he had pointed out, he said, when you read like these things in the Iliad, like where Hector makes a sacrifice to Zeus and he loses anyway. And it's just like, oh, okay, well, Zeus is on their side today. Like, you know what I mean? There's not this attitude that I gave you something, so you owe me something. It's like there is these arrangements that you try to make, but you're dealing with forces like exactly as you just said that don't care.
Yeah, it's like beyond your control. It's older than anything you can imagine. I wouldn't say that she's a deity, but given
no, I wouldn't either.
Yeah, but given the fact that the Slavic mythology is barely like existent because there was no writing, so we kind of are filling the gaps with fairy tales and stories, right? But also, this is when we have these elements of mythology, it's very, very masculine. It's very patriarchal. It's like almost as patriarchal as like Norse mythology. But the power, like there are main gods, but the power really belongs to all these female demigods or, mythological creatures, whatever you call them. And they mostly represent nature and how powerless you are in the face of nature.
Yeah, we tend to forget that in this world because, we have everything at our fingertips. Like we're not living out in the wilderness under the stars, generally speaking. And if you do, I mean, there's all kinds of terrifying things that can potentially happen. It's if you think about civilizations or even tribal cultures that are trying to just kind of build things out of the land and so forth. It's not like now where, we have our houses and we have our indoor plumbing and we have this and that. And, we go to the store and we buy things. We don't have to go hunt for our food. It's a whole different way of thinking about it. And I think that's something, we tend to forget. But then there's certain things like there was just the hurricane down in Florida, right? And I don't know what the results of that are at this point. I mean, I know this was supposed to like hit Northwest Florida very bad, and we're going to be getting some rain and stuff from it. But I know that, but things like that. I mean, you can be prepared. You can have a weather service that tells you, oh, this is coming, but it's still not going to stop it from destroying something of yours. You know what I mean? If it's going to be destructive, it's just going to be destructive. No matter what you do. I mean, unless you're, it's almost like a matter of luck.
Yes, and also with all your civilization, with all our technology, computers, cell phones, cars, with satellites, anything. Anybody who hikes, when you spend the night in the woods, things become spooky. I used to be a swimmer, and there is no force in the world that would force me to swim in murky water in like a lake. Because we imagine things, right? It's like, especially it's getting dark, you're in the woods, you can literally see things, like which are or aren't there. And
sorry, go ahead.
And this is when Baba Yaga like literally appears, right?
Exactly. Well, it's funny. I've been watching, I guess because it is spooky season, I've been watching a lot of things. Like one of the things that kept coming up for me was like Appalachian, if you say Appalachian or Appalachian folklore. I don't know. I always said Appalachian, and now I hear people say Appalachian, so whichever. But they have this whole thing about these creatures or these people that appear in the woods, and it's like, they have these rules, like if you saw something, no, you didn't. If you heard something, no, you didn't. If you're in the woods, draw the curtains at night. If something looks in at the window at you, you're in trouble. It's like, yeah, it's something that I think even in the modern world hasn't totally gone away in certain places. There's still that, there's always a danger of going into that space. And I think that's kind of, to a certain degree, that's what Baba Yaga represents. Like, how are you going to manage that? It's not a simple ethical thing, even though it may sometimes seem that way,
Yeah, one of the poems that I'm teaching very often is the Goethe's Erlkönig. And it's always the question, was there really something in the woods? Was the father missing this because he's too educated and he's the child of enlightenment after all? And the child who sees the things is dying because they really existed there and they were not properly recognized. So this elves, right? This is translated into English as elves, which is horrible idea because it's something else. It is a Baba Yaga, really. This is how I see it. Erlkönig is really the form of Baba Yaga.
Well, yeah, and that's it. And actually, to your point, the fact that these are not deities, and we've talked about other aspects of Slavic mythology on the podcast and so forth. So it's not, they're not deities. And what's interesting, and I think I said this to you before, is that that's almost like ancient Roman religion, because ancient Roman religion was also, until they adopted Greek mythology, or even Etruscan mythologies, they did not. A lot of that was taken from Greece. It was the same thing. It's like you had kind of like these figures that were not deities per se, but they were figures that represented like, or were actually. There's always the question of, how real are they internally, externally? Are they a symbol of something? Are they real? And I always say it's a little bit of both. There's an internal and external reality to it. I did want to ask you a different question, just to kind of take a slightly different tack. One of the things you were mentioning was that you teach, you're teaching the creative processes class, I think, right? Yeah.
Yes.
I remember taking that class. That was back in 1991. I took that class we had the music department at the time. I can't remember his name. So that raises the question, because one of the questions that comes up a lot with regard to this school is because people are going to do, people who are fully enrolled are doing a project, okay? And that was kind of the scary piece for some people, because some people are like, oh, I'm not creative. I don't know how to do things. I don't, and I'm like, yeah, well, we're not here to like beat you over the head and tell you you're doing it wrong. Right. But I am curious to know, like, when you're teaching creativity, like what are your thoughts on trying to teach? I mean, I don't know, to say teach creativity just sounds a little too, maybe it's a little more nuanced than that, but just what's kind of your approach to dealing with creativity in trying to teach it?
Okay, so the course is really called Creative Process, and I have to go in this course through all the stages of the creative process, from inspiration, through the actual making, through the product, through the actually, and this is what I add on myself, like selling this product, selling to the world, like how to make other people be interested in your own project, right? Because we all love our children, our little things we make, but everybody, I'm a photographer, so I know that everybody who was exposed to someone else, like your friend, coming back from the trip, showing you 350 photographs of them on vacation is torture. And they love these photographs. They don't know they are bad because they love them, right? So for me, in this creative process, what I'm doing, I'm trying to make people recognize what they love to do, but also to make it, the way they communicate, to make it interesting to other people too. But my point in this class when I started, that there is nobody is not creative, like there is no person who is not creative at all, because we are all creative. If you are alive, you must be somehow creative, right? Mm-hmm. Because survival comes with creativity. And even if this is a relatively new study, we study creativity really like starting in the 20th century because it's related to the Western concept of individuality. Our ancestors been creative all the time, on every level. So where I see danger to creativity in modern world is the fact that we forgot how to play, that we should play.
Oh, I talk about this on my morning live stream all the time. So go ahead. Yeah.
So I'm teaching, like this is the kind of old book, but there's a lot of points. I teach it through Huizingam Homo Ludens, but because this is the old book, I'm kind of translating the entire notion to the necessity of the ability of taking risks, failing, getting up and trying again, and just playing with ideas and playing with things and just essentially having fun. Because people are so goal-oriented that we forget that sometimes you have to give yourself space just to stare at the blank page for hours, or to paint and, be not happy with the results. How to accept the fact that somebody is not going to like what we create, right? And sometimes we don't like what we created, and maybe not to burn it at the first moment of dislike, but how to learn from it.
Yeah.
So, like for me, the idea of play is essential, and this is where Baba Yaga comes, and tricksters in general, because tricksters play, and because our culture is very serious, and we like the world as a binary construct with bad and good, and something which is productive and not productive, or worth and not worth anything. We should remember there is the entire spectrum, and if you are not Mozart and you are not Da Vinci, it doesn't mean you are not creative. There is creativity on every level. This is not 0-1. This is not black and white. We all make things, and it doesn't have to be physical product, right? When you think about creativity.
Oh no, right. You can make a piece of music. You can make there's people can dance. People can there's different ways to be creative. And that actually raises when you mentioned, first of all, the play element and then the trickster element, that's really interesting because, that's what I think we're trying to get. If you think about the trickster in stories, the trickster sometimes is very clumsy, actually, in stories, can brings an element of chaos into something. And that's actually a really good way of framing it, because if we think about our students, our university students, okay, because we actually both teach at the same university. And you know how it is when they do certain things, they want to get it exactly right. And they want to get it exactly right on the first try. It's like, if you're learning, you're not always going to get it exactly right on the first try. I mean, it's not that you're bad. I mean, and like I said, I try to have a lot of things where students, if they say, okay, I want to try to do this again, or I want to give people an opportunity, to do it right, depending on what it is. But but there's this definite sense that people have, like when I used to be a supervisor, I mean, I have people, they would be doing certain things that were a craft in and of themselves, even within a technical field. And I would say, okay, these are the things you need to adjust. And they would just get very, very upset. It's like, but I did my best on it. It's like, look, this is not a personal attack on you. It's just, this is the way, in that particular case, there was a specific way it needed to be. But people have a hard time with that. And especially when it comes to creative stuff, because it feels very, very personal to people, Oh,
yes. Yeah. Because, I'm both academic and a photographer, and I know two kinds of pain. In the academic world, if I present a paper or I publish it and somebody raises a question and it looks like I didn't read something that it should be included in this research, or like I omitted an important problem, this is because I didn't do this work and I can fix it easily.
Mm-hmm.
If this is artistic world or creative world, this hurts differently. because you put your heart and soul into this and somebody doesn't like it. And it doesn't feel like there is much room for improvement, right? So this is what I'm teaching in this course. These are all our children. We love them, but not all of them are perfect, right? Like us. Sometimes your creations are just there to teach you something about your next creation.
Or about yourself even. I mean, sometimes, like I'm working on another piece of writing right now. I do have other ones that I have to finish that I want to get out, but I'm working, and I mean, and again, with my stories, I'm not even sure who likes them, who doesn't them. I've had reviews of some of them, which were good, but I'm like, other people are probably looking at it. Like I had one person who read my one novella. She's like, all right, I had to jump to the end. I don't get it. I don't like it. The structure was freaking me out. I didn't like, and it's like, okay, well, that's just not your thing. I don't think it's a bad work, but it's just, it was clearly not everybody has the same idea about what it is that they want. But it's also to the point that not everything we produce, we live in this society that says everything we do has to have kind of like almost a financial attached to it, like, oh, if you're going to spend your time creating something, well, I hope you're going to publish and make money out of it, and that's not always necessarily the case. In fact, oftentimes it's not the case,
Yes, absolutely. That's the problem of creativity, right? Because sometimes it's not measurable.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it takes more time. Sometimes, you have to accept that this is not going to work. Sometimes you are going to hit the wall, right? Sometimes you are going to have the artist block. So there are techniques to help with all these problems, right? Because we recognize that everybody who creates is having these problems. People write in different ways, right? So I found out, talking to like academic friends, that some of my friends, whom I envy, when they have to write something, they have the entire thing ready in their heads. I had a good friend who writes academic books like this. He said he sits at the computer when he exactly knows what he wants to write. And he has a book ready in a month. I'm beyond envious, because for me, I actually have ideas while I'm writing. Yeah. And it takes me much more time. Does it mean that my book, when it eventually comes out, is worse? Absolutely not. I just have a completely different process, which happens to be more time consuming. But the product, nobody can see this, right? It's different kind of process, different kind of birth.
Well, that's exactly right. And I think it's, because people do things in a different way. For me, I usually start with an outline, like I have an idea. Or if I'm writing fiction, it's like, okay, I have one scene in my mind. And then I'll write that one scene. And then it's kind of like, but then I get like a dump. Like all of a sudden it's like, oh my God, like I've had times where I've had to like, okay, drop everything and going to spend 8 hours writing the story, which usually it's an incredibly inconvenient time, like I've got classes to teach and I've got to go here and I've got to go there. And, but then there'll be months where I have nothing. So, it's just, And with academic stuff, exactly. Like I find that I have a mental outline and then it's like, I can work off that. But like you, there's times when I think, oh, well, wait, what about this thing? And then you kind of go off in another tangent, another direction.
Yes, another direction, because you had an idea, you have a title, you had a good intro, and for some time you fight against yourself and the material, which is actually proving you wrong from the very beginning, but you don't want to give up this idea, which is such a good title, right? And then you have to...
This sounds like such a great thing to write, and now I don't want to write it.
No, because you're writing something actually contradicting yourself. So my point would be like, there is never project too small. There is never idea too small. And there are going to be dead ends, and there are going to be, walls to hit. But literally, like I had students who were like making a sweater for their dachshund, and they were like one of the best projects I had in class because they were like sincere and real, and they really needed a sweater for a dachshund. So, I think that like this kind of like artistic honesty is very, very important. Like just don't force yourself into something that you don't want to do just because you think it's going to sell. It kind of shows.
Right. Or even just trying to do certain things. I mean, obviously, like within the university setting, you're trying to teach people a variety of skills. But when we talk about projects, like sometimes, yeah, if I gave students like say, okay, I want you to do a collage project on this topic or something like that, sometimes they got way more into it and had a lot more fun than just being like, okay, I have to write a paper on this. And then they go to ChatGPT and then they try to put something out. And then I know that they've done it from ChatGPT, and I'm like, right, I'll give you like 2 weeks to do it over.
Yeah, no, this is what you said. Is like literally, this is how I end almost every class when I give assignments. Like, don't forget to have fun on it, because my students had to do nothing for 15 minutes first, and then they have to kind of write about it, and then they're writing a small poem, then the larger poem, then to turn it into a song. So they don't know this yet, so don't tell them.
Hopefully they're not going to watch this. Well, actually, though, I was going to ask you, because you have a very interesting assignment, and you just sort of alluded to it, that you give your students. And I've talked about this in other places, the do nothing assignment. Can you just talk about that for a minute?
Okay, so I ask my students who are incredibly busy. This is the state college, and people have jobs, and very often they commute, and they juggle lots of things at the same time. I ask them to stop and do nothing for 15 minutes. But I specifically ask not to meditate, not to like work hard in your head about what you're going to do next. Just do nothing.
No phone, no TV.
No phone, no TV, nothing. But you can watch to the window or like look inside, but be with yourself. And the students are like 20, 22, and they're mostly terrified.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm getting, because they have to give me like a very short reflection on this, and they very often say like, this was really, really, really painful. And I ask them not to set alarms, but to have some sort of watch or phone next to them. And when they think that 15 minutes passed, check it.
Okay.
And I also found out that they have absolutely no sense of time.
Wow. Okay. So that's another level to it that I didn't know that. Yeah. So in other words, they're thinking, 15 minutes has passed. And then they go and
yeah,
look.
It's like 3 minutes.
Yeah. Right. It just seems like it's an eternity, because it's like, I have to be doing something,
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that's great. Wow. Yeah. Pat's saying, wow. Yeah, exactly. And a lot of people I know at least some of the people who are going to be taking these classes already are meditators, or people who know how to meditate and so forth. And that's what's interesting. It's kind of like you're in this space where, a lot of the meditations, like a lot of the ones that I've learned, are ones that, it's rather than trying to sit and empty the mind, it's kind of like, okay, you're focused on a thing, Now, of course, in this assignment, you're not meditating, but that's another example of when you are in a space where you are, where you're basically, you're not trying to engage the mind. Like a lot of times in meditative practices, it's like you watch the mind just go by and you ignore it. You know what I mean?
No. I know that I cannot empty my mind, no matter what I do.
Yeah.
But I also ask them not to concentrate on a thought or anything like this. And why I'm doing this? Because one of the best ideas about my creativity, like my projects, came to me on a train when I was just watching the world pass, like the old school, what people did on trains before cell phones.
It's what I still do. I sit on the train. That's my opportunity to look at the landscape. Yeah.
Yeah, but not even watching landscape, not actively like being involved with environment. I had one of came to me out of nowhere. I don't know how it works, right? But I think that we should give ourselves this opportunity.
Well, we had talked about this in terms of emptying space. One of the people who's on my live stream, and she's also in some of my classes. She was talking about her daughter, who was like, and I forget how old her daughter was. I want to say it was like maybe second grade. I could be wrong, but her daughter was told by her art teacher, was given a piece of paper and told to draw. And she is like, and she made some kind of a comment of, why do I have to fill in all the empty space? And it feels like I'm drowning, or like I'm overwhelmed by having to put all this stuff in this space, And the way that she kind of phrased it, I was just like, wow, that's like a really profound thing to realize, because we always feel like we have to fill up our space with something. And I know offline, I've talked to you about my mom and stuff, but I know my mom is one of those people who she just like right now, she's like at a point where the doctor's like, okay, you need to sit still for a while. And she's like, I can't, I have to go out and sweep the driveway. I have to go out and clean the gutters. I have to do something every minute. I have to pull crabgrass out of the lawn. And it's like, no, you don't have to do any of those things. But yeah, it's almost like because sitting still, because our minds are going as much as our bodies.
Yes.
And,
so there's like being busy all the time, right? This fight against chaos, or the fight against things you cannot control, this need to constantly control and organize. There are such enemies of creativity, really, because creativity is born out of somehow chaos, right? And this need to organize, the neatness, the obsessive neatness of our culture. I'm not saying being neat is bad, but allowing yourself like things to happen, right? And this is what I think is, again, going to tricksters and Baba Yaga and all this. They are not incredibly organized and neat creatures.
No, exactly.
Right?
It's completely just it's right. And and you know that. Sorry. Now here's my creative thought here. Just kind of jumping on that. Yeah, because one of the myths I'm doing in mythology right now in my class is about the Titanomachy, you know, and a lot of these, like, you know, Zeus battling Typhus and stuff. And a lot of this is mythology surrounded around making order out of chaos. You know, I mean, there's a succession myths and all that kind of stuff, but it's about making order out of chaos. And we feel that that's the way that we have to do things. This is why we rely on numbers so much. We think numbers are so great. Oh, we need to do 8 million assessments. And I'm like, you know.
And watch, right?
Right. Mm-hmm. Organized chaos is what Pat's saying here. Yeah. It's, that there's all these things that we have to do. And it's like, no, because I mean, I'm just thinking as we go along about what you're saying here. And I'm like, yeah, that's just it. It's like, creativity comes out of the chaos. It doesn't come out of that space where we are. So I say, right, I'm going to sit down today and I'm going to write this many pages. I mean, and there are people who do that. Okay.
Yes, absolutely. And there is nothing wrong, because the process is really, you have to work, right? The idea to be the best. If you're writing a novel, you can have a most fabulous idea, but if you don't put these hours into this novel, it's not going to happen. Right. But so these two things, they have to be together.
Right. Well, right. You have to do them both. And it's hard when people have no ideas and then they're like, I'm going to sit in front of a piece of paper. That's where I think the harder thing comes in. And sometimes it's because you've decided, okay, I can only be creative from 6 to 7 p.m. tonight. And now I don't have time because I have these 20 million other things to do. It's like, yeah, we don't value space. And I think this is also why AI kind of creeps in as a way that people, because first of all, they think it's going to do it perfectly, which we both know it doesn't. But there's this, but we have this, but this idea that, we don't have time for creativity. Like, this has to be done and something's going to do it for us. I don't have time to write this. I don't have time to do that. And maybe there's some things like I like AI personally. Like, I need to write a business plan. Here, dump it into AI, let them write it, you know? I mean, but other things, it's like when it comes to creative work, other than making it being an interesting experiment and seeing what a machine can generate, I'm like, I don't know. I said, do people really want to sell their creativity out that way, you know?
Yeah, absolutely.
And
yes, but there's another aspect to this, Brigid. This is very important when you say sometimes people have to be creative within this slot of time.
Right.
It's like creativity on assignment, right? In creative jobs, like there's a photographer in the field and they have to create like a report. And you have just 2 hours. How to put yourself into the space and not to fail, right? Because, the muse is somewhere else and you're waiting for a muse, it's not coming, and you have to be creative because you have like an hour left.
Or people who write like late night comedy every night or something, like you're on a deadline, like you're in there and you've got to get this done by a certain period of time.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely.
It's very difficult. Yeah. And it's, yeah. So, but I think a lot of people also feel like it might be that kind of a high pressure situation, because a lot of time, like, well, what we're doing in the school, there is obviously a finite amount of time in which a project has to get done. And there's really only one project for the term. It's not like people have, all this homework and all these assignments or anything like that. But it's just something for, but literally I think what we're trying to do here, well, first of all, we're focused on feminine myth. We're focused on Baba Yaga. I'm going to be focused on Hecate and Persephone in particular this time around, because I'm talking about life cycle initiations and myths. So I'm looking at it from a different, Kate is going to be looking at she says La Llorona. She uses the Latin American pronunciation, and also Santa Muerte. We're going to, we're all, and Max is going to be looking all at poetry and doing like a poetic survey, but we're all kind of looking at it. We're all kind of like, it's like, it's a form of play. That's really what this school is. It's a form of play and showing people that they're still capable of playing, because we don't live in a world that values play. And we don't live in a world that, that allows us, that we feel like play is somehow a waste of time. Just like some people think art is a waste of time.
Absolutely.
Yeah, they think like, oh, it's a luxury, and I'm like, and it was something I was reading the other day on Jordan Peterson, and his somebody was writing on his. I guess he gave a lecture on the goddess Kali, which was as dreadful as you might expect it to be, and it was just, but just the idea that everything has to support this kind of, this kind of late stage capitalism narrative, but also the idea that this is the way that the world is. And the author was pointing out, he's like, no, it's only been that way for like 1% of humanity. And who says that that's the better way to be? He says, you had civilizations for 50,000 years where the artists were the center, and because art is so important. It's so, I mean, we have this consciousness and the way that we can organize and generate things. But the inspiration itself, like we might say in the more spiritual side of it, that it comes from source. Like they'll say it comes from a place that's, but it's not a place, it's a place that like works in image. It's like, if we think about the mythical imagination, that works in image. It's like your dreams, they work in image.
Absolutely. And we read same texts and we talk about same stories and we talk about same characters, and sometimes we have absolutely different interpretations. And I'm a great proponent of what Umberto Eco called the open reading. Nobody knows what the author wanted to say, right? There's absolutely no way of knowing it. And I've been teaching a certain novel. I've been teaching Master and Margarita, which I love absolutely.
Oh, Master and Margarita, yeah. Mm-hmm.
I adore this novel. And I've been teaching it for like 30 years in 3 different languages. And I think that I know every line in this book. And I was teaching it once when I was teaching general humanities. And I had one of the students like asleep half of the classes, like barely surviving, and this is the kind of C+ student, you don't expect anything. And suddenly he woke up and he had a comment, and this was like revelation to me. I have never thought about this book this way. This was such a lesson to me that there is no invalid opinion and there is no invalid perspective. And
and sometimes you get that from the most unexpected sources.
Absolutely.
Yeah. We have a comment. What is it? Fascinating topic. Super interested in this. And just Jordan Peterson is one of the most openly misogynistic public figures. There's nothing to gain from him. Yeah, I think I would totally agree with that statement. I know there's people who have said that they get something out of his work, but I just one of the things I was talking about in my last thing was how much I hated him in graduate school, because, as you know, my book is written from kind of a depth psychology perspective. And then people are going, oh, but Jung, he's so racist. And I'm like, or he's so misogynistic. I'm like, no, he's not. But because their exposure to Jung was Peterson, that was their interpretation. Yes. And I'm like, no, he's just, well, anyway. I could derail into him, but I actually have 2 live streams that I actually did on that subject. So yeah, so I have those. Those are also on this channel, actually. At least one of them is. So you can always check that out. But yeah, and this is but yeah, kind of what you're saying there. We are, it's just this space of, you don't know where the inspiration is going to come from. And that's interesting that you brought that up, because one of the things I brought up to Max too is it's kind of the idea that we have students, okay? And some of our students, they say, oh, I didn't take a 4-year degree, or I didn't do this, and you know what? It doesn't matter. It doesn't really matter. It's like you still, people think that unless they have certain credentials that they have nothing to offer. Now, we all have the credentials in this school, but that's also because sometimes people, they want somebody, to give them a certificate who has credentials. I mean, it's something that they can point to. But at the same time, that doesn't mean all of us know everything, There's certainly
nobody does.
No, absolutely not. So there's something you can definitely learn from people. And I think, I think it's just going to be an interesting mix of perspectives. And I really do hope that we get more people to join us. Probably like this is what we're doing for this term. Next term, 2025, we'll see if we can arrange it in a way that maybe some more European people can get in on it. And because right now it's good for kind of the East, maybe the USA, but a lot of people like in the UK who are 5 hours ahead, they're like, I'm not going to take a class at 11:30 at night. We have to, we're going to be kind of working stuff out this term, but it's, I think this is great. And one of the things I've kind of wanted to demonstrate in these live stream conversations is just not only the kind of stuff we're interested in and that we're talking about, but also, I mean, this is just the way that we're approaching the material, because we're going to be talking about the mythology and the folklore and about these ideas and the way people think about them. And again, it doesn't matter. It doesn't just have to be the academic perspective. I mean, an academic perspective means a lot of different things. Like you and I both come up from a humanities background. I have a little bit more of a like psychoanalysis kind of bent on it. But then like Kate's an anthropologist and Max is like he teaches creative writing and stuff too, so it's like and he's a musician as well. So we have like all of these kinds of perspectives. And I think we can all appreciate what people have to bring to the table. And and it's not, it's not to be there. I think if people's, we were talking, what was it? I was telling somebody about classes that I had heard about. Like I'd heard 2 different things, like somebody who was taking like their art class in like, again, really young, like 2nd grade or something. And being told to draw clouds, right? And then the teacher telling them that their clouds were wrong. You didn't draw your clouds correctly. Or my friend's daughter who had written a story for her high school literature class, like a creative writing class. And she was given like a D on the story because she wrote about a woman who was wearing red shoes. And the teacher said they should have been blue. It was like, what, and I think some people have that impression like, oh, you're going to come in and you're going to find something to pick apart about this, but it's not like that. It's just, that's not what we're really here to do. We're just kind of here to help people, I really help people develop voice too, and to kind of see what they want to do, with their stories and so forth. So that's really where we're kind of going to with this. So I am hoping that more people are going to join us. Like I said, the full term registration probably by next Tuesday. But if people still want to audit and say, oh, I didn't have time for that, but I want to jump in on the other. Sometimes some people have financial things about it too. So I've said those people can contact me separately because I can, we can talk about like how they can work that out. But we've got a small little group so far, and I'm hoping that we can have, at least a couple more if some people wanted to join us. And again, as I mentioned at the beginning, if people want to donate and don't necessarily want to, and it's not like people have to make big donations either. It's just there's a GoFundMe to help kind of support the school costs as we're getting started. So is there anything else you were going to wanted to mention at all, Joanna, before we close up?
Really. It's I'm very excited for this because what Brigid is doing is fabulous in other areas and in this area, and I'm absolutely sure that this can be fascinating experience for everybody joining, including me. I'm here to have fun, definitely.
Exactly. We're all here to have fun. And that was kind of part of the idea, was that a lot of us, we have our structured teaching that we do. And it's like, well, what if we could teach the stuff we really wanted to teach, And that's kind of what this is about too. So yeah, I mean, we have excited students. Everybody here is, and all the teachers are all excited about the material. So it's not like, yeah, somebody assigned this to me and I got to teach it. It's like we all know our subjects and we're into it, and that's really the important thing, having fun with it. So, yeah, so it's going to be great. So thank you so much for joining me tonight, Joanna. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And yeah, just stay on with me for a minute. What I'll do is I'll end the live stream. I want to say thank you to everybody who's joined us tonight and checked it out. And yeah, hopefully, like I said, anybody who missed part of it or whatever, the replay will be on YouTube. And, again, some of you I know I'm going to see, and other people, hopefully you can join us. So take care.
Thank you.